Today, we're going to take a look with common sense at what remains of the ballot counting, because this election is much closer than any of the networks led you to believe last Wednesday. And it is not determined yet. And there is a path to victory for the president, a path to re-election. It's not an easy path. It's not a definite path, but it's a realistic path. And having called this election so early, the big media, big tech, and the Democrat Party is trying to cut that off. And they're trying to cut off any consideration of it, which is outrageous, since they took over a month to allow Al Gore to contest just one state. Here, there are a number of states at issue, and a significant amount of evidence of rampant fraud. All they say on television is there's no evidence of fraud. I'm going to now show you lots of evidence of fraud. There's one thing for certain about this election. Not certain who won it. It's certain that this was the most dirty, the most fraudulently conducted election on the part of the Democrats than any in recent history. And we're going to show you just why. And we're going to begin by concentrating on two states, the state of Pennsylvania and the state of Michigan. We're going to concentrate on those two because that's where we've been able to concentrate our investigation originally, and the evidence in both states is overwhelming. So in the state of Pennsylvania, what you basically have is a lawsuit now filed, a federal lawsuit, seeking to disqualify the votes that were not properly observed. In fact, that weren't observed at all. Mail-in votes are inherently suspicious. By that I mean they are unreliable. This is not me talking. This is the Supreme Court warning us way back in 2004 in a case called Griffin against Rudy. Justice Souter announced that mail-in votes are less reliable than in-person votes. Voting fraud is a serious problem and is facilitated by mail voting. There are other Supreme Court cases that make that same opinion. So having decided to go to mail voting, pushed very hard by the Democrats, there had to be built in some very, very strong guarantees that nothing would be done that would compromise the vote. So the major issue, the major device that was placed there is observation, which follows on what happens with absentee ballots. For years, when you examine absentee ballots, it's almost routine. There are three people at least there: the counter, a Republican, and a Democrat. Each one is opened. Envelope is looked at. You check the outer envelope, which is the envelope that provides really the security, because that's the one that's not anonymous. It has the name, the address, voter identification, other things that are indicia of reliability. You can check that against a voting roll. And once that is okay, both sides agree, you open it up. The ballot now virtually becomes anonymous, or should. And then, assuming there's nothing wrong with the inner envelope, every once in a while there is, usually not, then you place that in the voting bin, the votes that are going to be counted. The ones that are suspicious, you put aside. And many are put aside, 10, 20% in a usual absentee contest. They tried to mimic that here by saying that all mail-in ballots, these new numerous mail-in ballots, now we're going to have the first time, they had to be observed by both parties. Different states use slightly different languages. Both parties have to be present, both parties have to observe, both parties have to examine, but the end result is, as the court in Pennsylvania has already decided, whether we're talking about being present, being able to observe, being able to see, it means having the ability to see the markings on the envelope so that you can make a choice as to whether or not it's valid or it's invalid. And that's the only time, you can make that choice. That's the only guarantee that that ballot is real or secure, is when you look at that envelope. If you deny the opportunity to see that envelope, you virtually have completely negated the process of security, and you've rendered the ballot, under the law of Pennsylvania and Michigan for sure, unlawful, illegal. This happened in the case in Pennsylvania. It happened in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh well over 600,000 times. By that I mean over 600,000 times the ballot was examined, it was looked at, the envelope was separated, and it was put in the voting bin, and the envelope was done away with. And no Republican, in fact, in many cases, no Democrat got a chance to look at it. Because every once in a while, there might be a Democrat who isn't reliable and might tell the truth. In fact, there is one. Totally unlawful. For 600,000 ballots. Every single one of those ballots is unlawful. And there's no reason to believe that many of them weren't phony ballots. Remember, on election night, Trump was ahead in Pennsylvania by 700,000 plus votes. That's an enormous lead. That's a lead very hard, if at all, able to be made up by legitimate voting. Mathematicians can differ somewhat, but most of them would tell you it's anywhere from 100% to 99% impossible to make up that with legal voting. Which is why in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh, when the Republicans showed up that morning to do their duty as inspectors or whatever, observers or whatever you call them, different states call, they were put in a corral easily 20 feet away from where this process was going on. They were not allowed to get any closer. Anytime they got any closer, they were pushed back, threatened with arrest. And during that process, well over 3,000 ballots went through, according to the testimony and the affidavits of the witnesses in this lawsuit called Trump against Bakvar, which is filed in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania. This lawsuit asserts that when the testimony is put in, that well over 6,000 ballots, let me first go to Philadelphia, about 3,000 in Philadelphia, were examined, opened, and put in the voting bin without observation by an independent observer, Republican or Democrat, but certainly not Republican, that the envelope contained anything, much less information that would suggest that it's a secure ballot. Again, under the law of Pennsylvania, outlined in this lawsuit, that is an unlawful ballot. The lawsuit also contains then many, many instances of fraud, situations in which on 20 or 30 occasions, a witness observed the backdating of ballots that came in late. Justice Alito, in this case, which had reached the Supreme Court earlier on, made a ruling that all ballots had to be in by 8 o'clock on November 3rd. Any ballots that came in after 8 o'clock on November 3rd had to be put aside and not counted, to have a further argument as to the legality or whether an extension would be allowed. Well, that was honored in the breach. There are 4 or 5 witnesses so far, probably more by the time we get to trial, that on any number of occasions, they saw ballots that were backdated. In other words, they were dated the 4th and the 5th, and they would remarked the 3rd, and then put in the process and counted as if they had come in on time, in complete violation of Justice Alito's order. Again, another unlawful act. A little harder to quantify, but certainly gives you the sense of the out-of-control behavior in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh, which, by the way, was not going on in most of the rest of the state, where the process was orderly, people were allowed to observe, people were allowed to watch. And when I say most of the rest of the state, that's most of the state that voted in large numbers for Donald J. Trump, whereas Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh were places where Biden got anywhere from 8 to 6 out of 10 votes. Very large pluralities for him. So you can hide an illegal vote or illegal votes very easily in a situation like that. There also are examples of ballots that were cured without anyone being notified. In other words, there was something wrong with it, and they fixed it up. They fixed up the ballot so that it would say Biden. There were observations of the counters actually, in many cases, taking no even look at the envelope beforehand to determine if it was secure. So not only did we have a Democrat or a Republican independently reviewing it, in many cases, the counter, the government official counting, didn't bother to look at the outer envelope, just took it, opened it, and took it, opened it, took it, opened it, took it, opened it. In other words, did no examination of security. Again, those numbers are not yet specified, but they were significant. Many more allegations of impropriety, many more allegations of illegal conduct, many more allegations of fraud. When the phony fake media and the phony fake politicians say to you there's no hard evidence of fraud, there are 50 witnesses so far to this lawsuit. There are affidavits. There's a large amount of evidence of fraud in the Philadelphia case, and it's only growing. But the main reason that this case should be overturned, this vote should be overturned, is we're well past the mark in the small margin of victory, and we have a very highly circumstantial situation that he was behind, Biden was, by 700,000 votes, and we can count 630,000 that were put in unlawfully. Sounds like a pretty close equation of the two things, doesn't it? Worse than that, you'd say, well, this only happened in Philadelphia, which is the capital of voter fraud. I mean, Philadelphia has a 60-year history of voter fraud. Recently, a conviction of several officials there for voter fraud. I mean, just as a matter of interest, Joe Frazier, the former heavyweight champ, has voted in Philadelphia after he died. The grandfather of the actor Will Smith has voted in Philadelphia before he died. So it'd be unusual in an election of this consequence that Philadelphia wouldn't cheat. It's hard to think of a big election in which they didn't. But at this level, it's disgusting. And at this level, it has an impact on the vote of the overall state. When you take out those unlawful votes, Trump won this state by something closer to that 700,000 he was ahead, maybe 300,000 votes. This was basically a landslide victory that was stolen by not allowing Republicans uniformly for 2.5 days to observe the ballots. So you'd say, well, that's the only place it happened, so what? Well, only one place. Well, now we move to the state of Michigan. In the state of Michigan, we've got a similar and yet a different situation. In the state of Michigan, we have, again, 40, 50 witnesses, 20, 30 affidavits that say at the center in Detroit, none of the rules were followed. First of all, numerous Republican observers who have given us affidavits under oath and will be part of the lawsuit say that they were prevented from going through the same observation that happened in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh. And I should have mentioned about Philadelphia that the numbers in Pittsburgh are about 330,000, where something very similar happened in Pittsburgh. So two places in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and now we're talking about Detroit in Michigan. In Detroit, we have numerous poll watchers, observers, whatever you want to call them, who will testify that they were prevented from seeing the ballots, that the ballots were handled in a very cavalier manner. They were hardly examined. They were just thrown into the pile. That many times they saw ballots that didn't equate to the voter registration list, and they saw creation of a new name put into the voter registration list. The number of times there, hundreds, thousands, can't tell you exactly, but there are many affidavits to that effect. But certainly, again, like in Pennsylvania, the numbers of votes that were unobserved, as required also by Michigan law, are well in the hundreds of thousands. More than enough to change the result of Michigan, again, a state in which the president was ahead by 5%, 4%, 5% the night before. But Michigan then has two unusual incidents. This was a matter of rumor right at the very beginning. Now it's a matter of proof. Somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, given the cavalier way in which ballots were handled here, let me show you a picture of a delivery of ballots through the back door. You tell me if these look like ballots that come from a machine somewhere or from a polling place, or do they look like these ballots were made up in a crooked Democrat machine politician's living room? There's one picture. I hope that's up on your screen. That shows you the boxes. By the way, the law of Michigan requires that those ballots should be in a wooden box, double sealed. That alone is a misdemeanor, which you're looking at right there. That's a crime. Now we have the ballots actually exposed. This becomes now a felony by the deliverers of ballots. Do they seem to look like officials of the government in a very careful way delivering ballots from a machine? Or do they look like, here's a couple more ballots needed so we can catch up on Trump? What do you say? You decide. And then these ballots, in complete violation of the law of secrecy of voting, are left out on the street wide open. That's the way crooks handle ballots. That's the way professional voter thieves handle it. And they had to do it in this case because they had to make up big numbers quickly, bigger than they thought. You know, the Democrats were planning for this, but they weren't planning for 800,000 ahead in Pennsylvania. They weren't planning on a 5% lead in Michigan and a 9% lead in Wisconsin. A lot of cheating had to be done, and the mail ballots gave them the opportunity to do it. Now, what I just showed you leads to a very, very important incident in which we have 3 affidavits for people who are there and 1 statement from a person who's a whistleblower who is still nervous about coming forward. But here's the evidence that would be presented in court, at least by the 3 who are already under oath. Somewhere around 4 or 4:30 in the morning, when a whole shift was changing, a whole group of ballots came in, amounting to something close to 100,000 were brought in the middle of the night through the back door, not the normal door they came in. Ballots that looked and were packaged similar to that. They were then thrown on the table, and they began counting them very, very quickly and very loudly, thinking there weren't too many people there. And as far as we can tell, going into the thousands and thousands of names being called, there was only one name being called, and that name was Joe Biden. In fact, many of these ballots didn't even have a down ballot. They didn't have any Democrats or Republicans voted for below. It was Biden, 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 Biden. Several people who had remained behind went up and observed them. They were all giving us affidavits, and they say all they saw was a sea of Biden votes. And then one woman, who is still a whistleblower, who was on the inside of this, has given information, and we are working on trying to solidify that, like the 3 affidavits we have, that it was in fact 100,000 votes, and it was all for Biden. And when she reported it, she was basically fired. This is egregious. This is not just the usual voter fraud. I mean, 600,000 unlawful ballots at a minimum in Pennsylvania. Philadelphia turned into a voting fraud capital, the seat of our democracy. Enough votes to overturn the 20 electoral votes in Pennsylvania. I mean, that state was won by Donald Trump and stolen by the crooked Democrats. And then we go to Michigan, And we've got the same things going on. Republicans put in corrals, Republicans not able to see hundreds of thousands of ballots, all of which should be declared unlawful. But then we get this amazing scene of 100,000 ballots brought in at 4 a.m, which appear to be, as far as we can tell, all for Biden or overwhelmingly for Biden. In fact, a witness who, the whistleblower, who hasn't been able to testify yet, basically says it totally reversed the vote from the night before. Left, vote Trump ahead. By the morning, Trump behind by the margin of these votes that all came in the middle of the night, that all seem to be, if not all, overwhelming majority seem to be for Biden. So the lawsuit now is started in Pennsylvania. It's in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. The lawsuit in Michigan, actually there are 2 lawsuits in Michigan. There's a state lawsuit brought by the Great Lakes Legal Council, which is a private organization, which is the one that contains the detailed allegations of the Biden votes that came in and were counted, and only Biden, that allowed him to catch up. That's brought by a private group, not even a Republican group. And it has 40, 50 affidavits and witnesses, including 3 key witnesses to that event. And then the suit that's brought by the president is going to be, and is in the Middle District of, I believe it's it's the Western District of Michigan. And that's the case in which we ask that those votes be declared unlawful, be removed from the tally before there's a certification by the state legislature. And that would award Michigan to President Trump. I want you to remember, under the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution that for this last year the Democratic Party has trashed so badly, it's disgraceful. And right down to the end, they're trashing it. Constitution of the United States gives the state legislature the main authority to govern elections. They set rules. Every state legislature had a common rule, slightly worded differently. It was that any of these mail-in ballots, which were very suspect and very, very controversial, but all of these mail-in ballots had to be inspected by both sides, of course, right? I mean, otherwise, we know that politicians cheat. You give them a chance to cheat. You can't put them on the honor code, certainly not in these big Democratic districts. All of a sudden, is it possible on election morning when they were going to get opened in 10 different places, the Democratic leader woke up and said, I got an idea. Let's put all the Republicans in corrals and not allow them to see any of the votes. You think the leader in Philadelphia woke up with that idea? The leader in Pittsburgh woke up with that idea. The leader in Detroit woke up with that idea. The leader in Flint, Michigan woke up with that idea, all independently. The leader in Milwaukee, Wisconsin woke up with that idea. Oh my goodness, I guess even the leader way out west, the leader in Las Vegas, Nevada woke up with that idea. The leader in Reno, Nevada woke up with that idea. The Democratic leader in Phoenix, Arizona woke up with precisely the same idea as the Democratic leader in crooked Democratic Philadelphia. And like nobody else did? Or is it possible that they picked the swing states, they picked the crooked Democratic machines that exist in those states, because a lot of Democrats probably would have told you to go to hell if you asked them to do this, because one of the key affidavits comes from a Democrat who worked in Detroit, a woman who worked her lifetime with elections, a woman who's an American patriot, not a Democrat or Republican. Her affidavit supports the entire thing. Weeks before, she says, they were training on how to fix the vote. Weeks before, they were fixing the early vote that came in. Weeks before, she was told when a vote comes in, don't check it, just put it right in. Don't check it, just put it right in. And on the day of the election, she saw Democratic workers of the city walk into the polling places with people and show people how to vote. By the time she got to the day after the election, she was totally disgusted. And she testifies to everything I just told you about. Not a Republican poll watcher, not a Republican observer, not a Republican at all. A citizen of Detroit who is willing to come forward and is willing to swear that the process in Detroit was a sham. It was a complete horror show. It was vote for Biden. When they saw a Trump vote, they made a face, and she says sometimes just destroyed it. Before Joe Biden starts, redecorating the Oval Office, I just have to tell him, it ain't over yet. There's a path to victory. It's not certain, but it's logical, possible, given the overwhelming evidence in Pennsylvania and Michigan of massive fraud, well beyond the numbers of Biden's rather small victory. And then the evidence that it suspiciously, all these states, Trump was ahead the night before and then all of a sudden behind. And then even more suspiciously, what I pointed out, the same exact process in 10 different places, but only in those 10 Democratic strongholds where corruption is there and they've stolen votes before. So when you look at those states and you look at the legal challenges that exist already as a matter of record and with affidavits, which is evidence, there is evidence of fraud. When they tell you there is no hard evidence of fraud, they are lying. Affidavits are evidence of fraud. Affidavits, again I say, are evidence of fraud. They are lying to you as they have been for 4 years. The American news media is now a propaganda outlet of the Democrat Party. This is evidence of fraud. Maybe true, maybe not true. Has to be tested in court. But this is called evidence. And we have to get around them, around the iron curtain of silence. This is not over. This is in the courts. We are well within the time frame that was given to Al Gore without people being accused of all sorts of things and being threatened with losing their jobs, losing their reputation, losing their families, and not being allowed in polite society. This is what our liberal community has come to. It's come to a bunch of bullies who believe they have the truth. And any method can be used. Voter fraud, framing a president, defaming a human being, destroying General Flynn's life, destroying Carter Page's life, destroying the president as much as possible and his family. All of that is necessary because they can bring us to wonderful socialism. Well, in any event, we're past that now. We're at the counting process. We're in the courts of the United States, the greatest courts in the world. And I predict that we have a voter fraud theft of the century. Never happened before like this in America, at least not modern America. There's a concerted effort in those states to use these mail ballots to make up the difference, knowing that Trump was going to win. And the reason it took so long is Trump won by more than they thought. They never thought they'd have to make up 700,000 or 800,000 votes in Pennsylvania. And that's why it got so sloppy. On election night, the Democrats panicked, and that's what led them into making mistakes like this, where the votes were all over the streets. And the votes are brought in at 4 a.m. And just Biden, quick, it had to be done quick. You couldn't fill out the rest of the ballot. You didn't have the time. I mean, if we woke up in the morning and Trump was still ahead by 500,000 votes, it would have been kind of really unbelievable. It was unbelievable. So don't listen to the phony fake media. Listen to the alternative media. Go around it. Use your common sense. Your common sense is going to lead you to a just result here. And finally, whatever the result here, don't let them cut it off early. We have to learn what happened so it doesn't happen again. This is America. Our right to vote is the core of our rights and our democracy. And what the Democrats did to our right to vote is disgraceful, and they should pay for it. I believe it'll overturn the election, but if it doesn't, it certainly should lead to many, many criminal prosecutions.